hidden behind the highly polished facade of mid-century America, where white picket fences shone in the afternoon sun and mothers offered freshly baked cookies to children in immaculate kitchens, there was a revolution, not one that originated from politics, protest, or law, but from a quite innocent half-hour family sitcom. Leave It to Beaver, which premiered in 1957, seemed to the eye to be simply another sweet image of the American dream. But behind the chuckles, the morals, and the laughter track-free pauses, it was actually redefining television, defying censorship, and introducing psychological realism into the living rooms of millions of viewers. What appeared to be innocent family entertainment was actually one of the most revolutionary shows of the era. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. When the series first aired, television itself was still in its nascent stages. Stations such as CBS, NBC, and ABC were struggling to gain traction in the post-war consumer boom, hawking not only programs but lifestyles. The family sitcom was the most valuable coin in this cultural economy. These programs promised reassurance. They provided viewers with the impression that America was stable, wholesome, and reliable, even while the Cold War festered overseas and domestic social turmoil seethed at home. Leave It to Beaver, developed by Joe Connolly and Bob Mosher, who had also written for Amos and Andy and other comedies, entered this atmosphere. They aimed not to write a fantasy, but to portray the way childhood really felt, with all the confusion, embarrassment, and miniature tragedies. That alone was a radical choice. The majority of family dramas in the 1950s depicted children as small adults, smart, quick-witted, and obedient. They were background decoration in the grand narrative of parental authority. But Beaver Cleaver, played by Jerry Mathers, was not. He stumbled, he wondered, and he was frequently confused by the world of grown-ups. He lied, he erred, he got into trouble, and he experienced shame. The series' willingness to show a child's view honestly added an extraordinary emotional richness to the show. Suddenly, parents viewing could identify with Ward and June Cleaver, and kids could relate to Beaver's constant gaffes and moral conundrums. It wasn't a tale of the perfect family. It was a tale of the everyday challenges of adolescence. But to put that story on the air, the producers had to fight against one of the most straight-laced censorship regimes in the history of entertainment. The 1950s were regulated by the so-called decency code of television, which monitored language, costumes, and even props with an ardor that seemed almost lunatic. As an example, Leave It to Beaver was notoriously the first TV show ever to show a toilet tank, and even then, network officials almost closed it down. The writers had written an episode where Beaver is hiding a pet alligator in the bathroom. To have the gag be successful, the camera had to reveal the toilet tank where the alligator was hidden. But then it was deemed inappropriate, nearly scandalous, that a bathroom fixture should appear on television. The negotiations dragged on for hours, and only after cutting every available second of FaceTime did the censors permit it. This ridiculous struggle over porcelain fittings was emblematic of the odd conflict between television's obligation to look clean and good and the dirty realities of American life that the show sought to depict. The series also innovated in sound and format. Contrary to virtually every other sitcom of its day, Leave It to Beaver never used a laugh track. That subtle decision resulted in a very different pace for the show. Without canned laughs telling audiences when to laugh, the comedy seemed more subtle and authentic. Sometimes the silence that followed a line created an almost tense realism, particularly when the situation involved lying, punishment, or guilt. Rather than being instructed to laugh, viewers were instructed to feel. That hushed honesty imbued the show with a tone more like drama than comedy, even while it never left itself entirely serious. It was an intentional flouting of television's forced cheerfulness, and it succeeded. And then there were the moral lessons. Each episode typically ended with some resolution, often involving Ward Cleaver, played by Hugh Beaumont, delivering a thoughtful reflection to his sons, Wally and Beaver. On the surface, These speeches seemed like simple lectures on right and wrong. But what made them revolutionary was their restraint. Ward rarely scolded or shouted. Instead, he explained, questioned, and reasoned. Leave it to Beaver discipline was not a matter of fear, but of understanding. This was a marked departure from the earlier show's authoritarian father figures who yelled commands or made punchlines. Ward represented a new cultural ideal, the father as gentle guide, not strict enforcer. His placid explanations set an example for a more psychological parenting style, one that accepted children's feelings instead of brushing them aside. The mother figure, too, was different than the stereotype often assumed. June Cleaver, immortalized by Barbara Billingsley with her pearls and pressed dresses, has often been misremembered as a submissive caricature of 1950s womanhood. But watch closely, and another picture emerges. June was consistently portrayed as intelligent, witty, and quietly in control. She was the emotional nexus of the family, the one who tempered Ward's stern rationality with compassion and insight. Though she certainly fit in with the gender expectations of the time, always perfectly dressed, always at home, her role had an integrity about it that spoke to women who were themselves juggling the unpaid work of family life. For some women spectators, June was no joke, but an acknowledgement of their own unobtrusive authority in the home. Leave It to Beaver, of course, did not occur in a vacuum. It was produced at a moment of huge social contradiction. The civil rights movement was expanding, and yet the world on the show was all white, suburban, and middle class. It was later criticized by critics for perpetuating exclusionary images of America. But on its own small scale, it did something subversively revolutionary. It acknowledged that even in this supposed perfect world, there were issues. Kids lied, parents fretted, siblings fought, and above all, love and forgiveness were required. The Cleavers might have been an impossible ideal, but they left room for imperfection. That tension between realism and fantasy is exactly why the show has lasted. Behind the scenes, it was not quite so easy. The child stars were given long hours of work under tight studio contracts. Jerry Mathers famously nearly didn't get the role when he told producers that he would prefer to go to his Cub Scout meeting rather than audition. His honesty won them over, and he was given the role. Tony Dow, Wally, later confessed that he felt trapped in the part, stereotyped as the clean-cut older brother, even as he matured into adulthood. Barbara Billingsley found herself floundering after the show ended, stereotyped as the perpetual TV mom until she revived her career decades on with a comedic role in Airplane. Hugh Beaumont, on the other hand, had the curse of never being anything other than Ward Cleaver, even though he wanted to be a writer and director. The show was a success despite all this, but it kept the stars tied to their characters in ways they never quite shook. But the effect was unshakable. When the show ended in 1963, after 6 years and 234 episodes, it left in its wake more than nostalgia. It had innovated methods, such as shooting from a child's point of view and not using laugh tracks, shared later by the Wonder Years through to Malcolm in the Middle. It had set an example of softer, more introspective parenting on television that spoke to shifting cultural values. And it had captured something universal about being a child, the feeling that adults are perplexing, the world is confusing, and errors are made while growing up. Leave It to Beaver is now commonly condensed into shorthand for 1950s conformity. Politicians use it as a metaphor for traditional family values, and critics denounce it as ingenuous. But viewers who return to the series with new eyes find something more. They see a show that subtly defied its own boundaries, smuggling authenticity into a period of repression. They discover a portrait of family life that, idealized as it was, still felt no need to disavow flaws. And they discover a cultural artifact that tells America more about what it hoped and feared than any amount of newsreels or histories. To see Leave It to Beaver today is to catch sight of the peculiar paradox of mid-century America. It was on the one hand a land of stability, prosperity, and optimism. On the one hand, it was a nation of rigid censorship, constricted social roles, and covert conflict. The Cleavers existed in a universe in which toilets were cause for controversy and laughter needed to be feigned, but whose storylines bore the burden of truth. That truth is why the show persists. Long after the sets were taken down and the actors departed, Leave It to Beaver still whispers its subtle rebellion. That even in the most perfectly presented family, life is messy, confusing, and deeply human.